This means that our senses and cognition have evolved not to see the truth of reality, but to survive in the environment. This is supported by evolutionary game theory, evolutionary graph theory, and genetic algorithms. These simulations and theorems prove that the probability of our senses and cognition evolving for truth is zero, with the exception of probability measures. This means that the structure of reality we perceive with our senses is likely completely detached from reality, and none of it is real in the way we think is real. This is similar to how a user interface hides the truth of the underlying hardware and software of a computer, allowing us to interact with it without needing to understand the complexities of the system. This is where scientific creativity comes in, as physicists are now saying that spacetime is doomed. This means that we must look beyond the traditional theories and explore new possibilities in order to understand the reality of our universe. This is because of the combination of Einstein's gravity and quantum field theory. This means that space-time is not the hard-coded specification of 4 dimensions that humans perceive, but rather an irreducible representation of the symmetries of space-time. This has been discovered in the last 20 years and has led to the idea that space-time is doomed and that it is time to go beyond reductionism. These structures are helping to simplify the computations of scattering amplitudes in the Large Hadron Collider and other colliders, as they are not bound by the constraints of space and time. They are making informed guesses about these structures, and they are hoping to find something that could give them the answers they are looking for without certain commitments. Later, they guessed one term expression that turned out to be equivalent. This discovery, along with others, led to the amplituhedron, which captures a big part of quantum field theory with gravity. This has led to a shift in modern science, where reductionism is being replaced by a need to go deeper and show how these 2 pillars of science are connected. This relationship between evolution and physics is important in understanding the deeper realm beyond space and time. The best scientific theories in physics and evolution are mathematical, and they will always have their own assumptions that cannot be proven. Decentralized ideas like DeFi in cryptocurrencies may make sense from an evolutionary psychology perspective. We can still test scientific theories, but we need to understand experiments differently. We need to measure what we can sense in space and time, and use that to inform our experiments. We must continue to do experiments and reverse engineer the brain to understand what is beyond space and time, and how it projects into Einstein's spacetime to give us things like neurons and neural networks. This is a difficult and challenging task, but it is necessary for us to continue to make progress in understanding the brain. They are finding precise mathematical projections from these deeper structures into spacetime, and are discovering static geometric structures. The assumption that spacetime is fundamental may be flawed, and this could be the fundamental flaw in the way we view the world. This could be why many of the theories about consciousness and its relationship to the brain are based on this assumption. It has been used for centuries, but is now seen as outdated. Instead, scientists are now looking for deeper principles, such as Einstein's theories of relativity and gravity, which are not reductionist but instead rely on postulates and assumptions. However, this has to stop at 10 to the minus 33 centimeters and 10 to the minus 43 seconds. Stephen Wolfram has proposed a data structure that could be the numbers that would make us happier in terms of scale, as they are very, 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 very tiny. We now have to think outside of space-time, but that doesn't mean that there's not good work to do on Newtonian physics. Scientists will continue to use space-time for good work, but to go beyond Einstein and quantum theory, we need to let go and use an automata approach prior to space-time. Dynamics and causality can mean a lot of things if we realize that everything is an interface. Eric Jonas and Conrad Cording used the tools of neuroscience to analyze a microprocessor, showing that lesion experiments on computers are not going to give us much insight into how it works. Our scientific exploration of concepts depends on the field. This idea inspired the author to pursue neuroscience at MIT, and he had the pleasure of working with Marr until his death. Evolution by natural selection does not answer the deeper questions of reality, but it does give us an interface to build intuitions about it. We can try to answer these questions by proposing new theories and then asking how much information our sensory systems give us about this deeper reality. We may never have a general answer, but we can keep trying to answer these questions within the framework of each new theory. If this is true, then as scientists, we would not be able to conceptually understand ourselves all the way, but we could know ourselves just by being ourselves. This would make science go personal all the way down, while still using the scientific method for conceptual understanding. Unfortunately, it is still unknown if we can ever truly deeply introspect to the bottom. This could be why we don't see aliens everywhere, as they may have realized that exploration is not a fruitful pursuit and have instead chosen to live maximally in other ways. The scientific method is always reaching out to the stars and trying to figure out the puzzle, but maybe if we can build more intuition that this is an infinite pursuit, we can choose to focus our energy on other pursuits. However, if we recognize that space-time is not fundamental, and we can get equations for the stuff that's beyond space-time, then maybe we can go around it and explore the galaxies that are beyond our reach. This could lead to better understanding and better being. Justin Mark simulations using genetic algorithms showed that the truth organisms never even came on the stage, and if they did, they were gone in one generation. I take it seriously, but I don't believe it is the gospel. I think we should use the best tools we have right now with humility, and I love game theory. To avoid this, it is important to use a variety of payoff functions and to test the results of simulations to ensure that the conclusions are valid. Additionally, it is possible to find special cases in which truth can evolve, but it is still unlikely to happen in general. Mathematics allows us to consider objects with probability 0 that can happen infinitely often in principle. This is an interesting debate between intuitionists and those who take the real numbers as real. Nicholas Geeson, a physicist, has recently explored how intuitionist mathematics can effectively quantize Newton and show that Newtonian theory and quantum theory are not that different. Ultimately, this debate boils down to how we should think about the reality of the Cantor's hierarchy of infinities versus a more algorithmic approach where everything is computable and finite. Yale's work on evolutionary graph theory and quantum game theory is interesting, as it changes the optimal solutions of game theory and could lead to interesting things emerging if organisms are able to adapt to a nearly infinite number of fitness functions. This means that when we pick up an object, we are getting a different set of actions and payoffs. This means that truth can go extinct and the organisms that just get an interface are the ones that win. The question then arises, from where do fitness functions originate? This theory is based on the assumption that space and time are fundamental, and that the distinction between living and non-living is an artifact of the limits of our interface. Ultimately, nothing is obvious and the question of what is living and what is not is a complex one. To understand where evolution comes from, we need to come up with a deeper theory than space-time, in which there may not be the notion of time. This deeper theory, when projected into certain ways, can give us space-time and evolution by natural selection. The idea of death is an important component of natural selection, and without it, evolution would not be possible. This concept of an organism is defined by its ability to move and become alive, as well as its ability to keep itself separate from the environment. There is also interesting work being done in the area of probabilistic inferences and Markov blankets, which may help us understand how organisms can stay alive. Ultimately, however, we must remember that there is a much deeper reality to living organisms than what we can see on the surface. When I interact with a proton, I could be interacting with consciousness. Just like when I look at a person, I'm creating a face that is not conscious, but the reality behind it could be. Elementary particles, such as quarks, leptons, and gluons, are tied to the data structure of space-time, so they don't provide much insight into consciousness. As organisms become more complex, they can build better portals into what lies behind space-time. They found that people with different types of color vision had an outsized influence on how the color circle was carved up and labeled. This suggests that evolutionary or genetic algorithms can be used to learn how to communicate in ways that are useful. Some theories suggest that consciousness is an emergent property of quantum states of matter, while others suggest that particles have a unit of consciousness. In either case, the fundamental components are particles and spacetime. There are many theories of consciousness, all of which assume that spacetime is fundamental. Panpsychism adds consciousness as an additional element, making it almost dualist in nature. Our best science is telling us that spacetime is not fundamental, and that if we want to get to the most fundamental level, we need to look at particles like quarks, leptons, and gluons. This is important for understanding consciousness, as we need to understand the different elements that project into what we call consciousness. It is not a fundamental framework, and it is not enough to make progress in consciousness research. It is like the belief that George Washington was bled to death for something that could have been easily treated, which ended up being wrong but widely believed as a medical tool. Reductionism, which assumes that space-time is fundamental, is wrong. Space-time is useful for theories like thermodynamics and understanding brain networks, but it does not get to the more fundamental nature of reality. We need to look at consciousness as something that creates space and time as a data structure, and pick the minimal assumptions necessary to model it. These experiences are fundamental and not derived from physics or functional properties of particles. I also believe that human consciousness is just one of a countless variety of consciousnesses, and even within human consciousness there is a variety of consciousnesses. My theory also suggests that consciousness permeates all matter, beyond the usual definition of what matter is inside space-time. My two basic assumptions are that conscious experiences have consequences and that there is a probabilistic relationship between them. I use the term conscious agent as a technical term, not implying any notion of self. There is no notion of a self, learning, memory, problem-solving, intelligence, or agency in this theory. Networks of conscious agents are computationally universal and can do anything that neural networks or automata can do. However, with conscious agent networks, we can use Markovian dynamics to capture any computable theory, allowing us to build memory and primitive kinds of learning. This opens the door for the possibility of non-computable interactions between conscious agents, which could potentially help us solve the hard problem of consciousness. This suggests that there could be an infinite variety of consciousnesses, and a vanishingly small fraction of them use space-time data structures and the kinds of structures that we use. We may not be able to comprehend these experiences, as evidenced by the fact that some people have 4 color receptors and can experience a new dimension of color that the rest of us cannot. This means that consciousness is more fundamental than spacetime as we perceive it, and that the hard problem of consciousness is to show how dynamical systems of conscious agents can interact. To explain why chocolate is so delicious, one would need to look at the probability space for conscious experiences and how certain conscious experiences are more likely to occur than others. This is the infinite consciousness that transcends any particular content. We can solve the hard problem of how to start with conscious experiences and build up space and time and brains, but it is a tough technical problem. However, there is no such thing as a theory of everything, and this conscious agent theory is just a 1.0 theory. We will always go deeper and deeper, but we will never solve the question of how the formless gives birth to form. Everything we are saying now will eventually be a laughing stock, but our puzzle-solving abilities will be respected. We discussed the fascinating way language can have so much ambiguity and how the specific choices of words can have such a difference in meaning. This means that the dynamics is timeless, but any projection of it will have increasing entropy, creating entropic time. We can make assumptions and try to understand how consciousness works, but ultimately it is an existential crisis that we can't fully comprehend. This competition can lead to the experience of chocolate being delicious, but the theory cannot explain how the formless gives rise to the experience of chocolate. This could explain how individual physical objects and evolution of natural selection come about. It could also explain certain spiritual traditions, where the finite self needs to be let go in order to access the deeper, timeless being that precedes any conscious experience. Consciousness is projected into selves, such as Dawn and Lax, and through conversations, it is trying to learn more about itself. Instead, I believe that consciousness is an ontologically fundamental part of the universe, and that reductionism is a useful methodological tool for understanding the physical world. Different theories, such as integrated information theory, orchestrated collapse of microtubules, and global workspace theory, are all exploring the idea of booting up consciousness from physical systems, but they have yet to find a way to do so. They suggest that complexity is ill-defined when it comes to understanding consciousness, as it is grounded in spacetime. It is possible to visualize reality using mathematics, probability, and Markovian dynamics, but it is not possible to visualize it in the same way we visualize spacetime in 3 or 4 dimensions. We can incrementally build intuition and understanding of reality by looking at pictures of electrons and photons interacting and scattering, which was made possible by Faraday's experiments and Maxwell's equations. Planck's work in 1900 also helped us to understand the problem of black body radiation and the ultraviolet catastrophe. This showed that science can be a flashlight into the deep fog, and that we can use interventions to open new portals into conscious experiences. Each consciousness has a unique character and personality, so with each new kid that is born, you are creating a new portal into a unique consciousness. However, it may be more accurate to say that psychedelics are tweaking existing portals rather than creating new ones. Ultimately, understanding the complexities of the portal system may give us insight into the full range of possibilities that consciousness is capable of. This would explain the origin of the universe and how my whole space-time interface works. I believe that the Big Bang story and the evolution of life and consciousness must come from something deeper and without time. I'm excited to see what the younger generation comes up with as they explore these difficult ideas. According to conscious realism, reality is an illusion perceived, and this has a lot of implications for daily life. We must remember that everything we do is ephemeral and that we have to recreate it every time we look away. This is now being cashed out in mathematically precise science, showing that these things only exist for a few milliseconds while we look at them. This has implications for how we interact with each other, as we are the entities that create these things on the fly, and there is nothing to them except what we create in this moment. We should not be worried about the ephemeral nature of things because we are the authors of space and time. We can now begin to state precisely the mathematical model of consciousness and how it maps onto space and time. This is related to conscious agent dynamics, which can be mapped to the permutation matrices. This mapping can then be used to link the amplituhedron to space-time. The interesting idea is how efficiently can you create interfaces that are convincing to all other entities that can appreciate such interfaces? This is similar to video games, where you only render the tree falling in the forest when there's somebody there to see it. It turns out that it doesn't take much to trick us into believing that we are in a virtual world. To test this, one can close their eyes and focus their attention on what is in front of them and then focus their attention on what is behind them. What is experienced behind them is the absence of anything, which is real. It's like a peekaboo game, where we are tricked into believing something is there when it isn't. This has been an interesting concept to me personally, as it makes me think about my mortality and the fact that I can't see what's behind me. It made me question my life choices and what I was doing with my life. It made me realize that the things I thought were important, like getting a house and car, were just illusions in a virtual reality. It made me face the fact that I was going to die, and that I had to find a way to make my life meaningful. This has been a difficult journey, but it has changed me as a person and made me more aware of the truth. This allows me to experience life without the need to think or attach to stories. He was explicit in his 1935 paper with Podolsky and Rosen that if we can't disturb a system, we can't predict its future state. This is a reminder that reality is more complex than we can understand and that we should be mindful of the stories we tell ourselves. The act of observation is an act of fact creation, and this theory of consciousness suggests that spacetime itself is an act of fact creation. On a personal level, it can be difficult to accept these ideas, and it can take time to meditate on them and face the rebellion within. I now understand that everything is temporary and that I am not something in space and time. I am attached to all the things in my life, but I know that I will eventually have to walk away from it all. It has also made me more aware of my own emotions and how they can be used to protect myself. I feel like I have a real stake in the game of consciousness and what it means to wake up. In the deeper sense, it is something that is often talked about in spiritual traditions, and it can be experienced in moments of no thought, when we can really let go of our thoughts and be in the present moment. Find something that you are passionate about and pursue it with dedication and enthusiasm. Don't be afraid to take risks and to make mistakes, as these are often the best way to learn and grow. Finally, remember that you are part of something bigger than yourself and that loving others is loving yourself. We have the power to create something new and unique, and the only limit is our imagination. The meaning of life is ultimately a mystery, but we can use our creativity and curiosity to explore and discover new things. It explores infinite varieties of structures to gain a better understanding of itself. This exploration is what creates the experiences and forms that come out of being. We discussed how it is important to know what you are not in order to truly understand yourself. I thanked him for being a special person and for taking the time to talk with me. I ended the podcast with a quote from Albert Einstein about the nature of time and space.